Good evening, everybody. How's everybody today? Today, I'm going to talk about one of the pillars that we talked about before, about one of them specifically about diet. I get asked a lot of questions about what's the best diet, what's the ideal diet. First of all, I don't like the word diet. It connotates a very negative feeling about what you're going to be putting in your mouth. I like to think about it as being a lifestyle. Most of the diets out there have very limited goods and bad points to them. There's some that are better than others. Some work for some people and don't work for others. Diet is very biologically individual. There's countless diets out there, the keto, paleo, raw food diet, SCD, GFCF, 80-20, on and on and on. Anybody can make a buck selling you something for a diet. There's usually some common threads on the ones that do help a lot of people, and I'll kind of discuss some of those. And they should be things that you incorporated into your lifestyle on a daily basis, ongoing, not just for a limited amount of time to lose some weight or to detox, but for forever. And the most common thread is to avoid processed foods and some of the really carbohydrates that break down quickly into sugars, most of your grains, the refined carbohydrates. As a rule, the diet should be primarily plant-based. There's variation to that. Some people do better with and without adding some animal protein to their diet. All in all, your diet should be local, seasonal, organic, and non-GMO. If you find products that say certified organic, supposedly they're non-GMO as well. I tend to not be real sure about that sometimes because there's so much drift in the fields that a lot of pesticides and things do interfere with other organic crops. So I would, even if it says organic, I would still clean it really well. And in some cases, if they're on the list of foods that are most apt to be pesticide covered, then you want to either peel them or scrub them really well. Most of the genetically modified foods have the pesticides incorporated into them, so washing them isn't going to help you. And most of those chemicals are things that really do a lot of damage to the microbes in your gut and inflammation. But getting to know your farmers, going to farmers markets, CSAs, get to know who's growing your food, both plant-based and animal-based. There's also some testing that you can do for genetics to see if you have certain SNPs that make you predisposed to having problems with certain foods. And there's testing for food allergies, and all those things can be helpful, but they can be rather expensive. The best way to manage that is to keep a food diary. And when you eat something and it doesn't agree with you, or you have gastric problems or headaches or just don't feel well, jot it down and narrow it down to the offending foods, because even healthy foods can sometimes be problematic. You can have sensitivities, or you can have full-blown food allergies to them. And in that case, you would do rotation diets to kind of lessen the amount that affects you. In some cases, there's some foods that you just have to stay away from for the rest of your life. There's some cultural history patterns that influence some of the foods that we're sensitive to. And generally, if you have a food that you eat frequently, and the biggest allergy offenders are foods that are pretty much in everything, your corn, wheat, soy, sugar, dairy, all those things are in so many of our foods, even when we don't think they are. And they can be hidden in the labels when we don't even think they are. But the more you eat something on a regular basis, the more apt you are to become sensitive to it or even allergic to it. I just discovered recently that I had a severe allergy to eggs, which is something I ate frequently. So now I realize some of the symptoms that I was experiencing after eating them, why I was having that. So keeping a journal and just kind of pay attention to how you feel afterwards. There's other ways to kind of discern allergic foods. But in a diet, you know, what's good for one person is not always good for another. So you really need to customize it. If you, again, I would go primarily plant-based because they're slower on the food chain and you have less things that accumulate in the tissues. But if you are going to go with any meat-based foods, make sure the meat is organically fed, that whatever animal that is organically fed. Beef should be grass-fed. Chicken and eggs should be pasture-raised, and don't fall for this cage-free or free range, because they can still contain them in a building that doesn't let them allow, you know, freedom out in the fields. And it's that diversity of their diet that makes the food much healthier. For fish, the best sources are going to be wild-caught Pacific fish. You don't want farm-raised fish, and you don't want Atlantic fish, because those are mostly farm-raised out. Even though they may not be contained in a farm, they're still contained out in the waters. But they have lower concentrations of the omegas that you really want, that are healthy for you. So if you're going to use the meats, don't keep them as your primary meal component. Use that as your side dish. Make the vegetables your most important part of your meal, whether it's a big, nice salad or several different vegetables, whether they're steamed, raw, or cooked. Avoid, you know, frying and even some of the grilling, because some of those practices cause problems with food. Avoid farm-raised foods if you can. Again, go meet your farmers and ranchers. There's several videos out on the market that talk about how animals are raised in captivity for food. And it's really horrendous. And if you had to do that yourself to prepare your own meats, a lot of people would become vegetarian. But, you know, if you have a source that you know has taken care of their animals and fed them properly, and you still choose to eat meat, then that's fine. But again, keep the diet as simple and as processed-free as possible. Aside from just going by how you feel, which I believe is the most important piece, and keeping a journal of it, there's other ways that you can also test for sensitivities and allergies. One of them is an old tried and true pulse test, where you kind of learn to take your pulse and see what your resting pulse is. You know, like when you first wake up, take your pulse and see what it is. And then throughout the day, at times when you're not stressed, just kind of see what your pulse levels normally are. And then after you've eaten something, eaten a meal, about an hour later or even 30 minutes later, take your pulse. If it's elevated quite a bit, then you might want to look at that meal and kind of discern what pieces of it might be an offender. Then you can kind of, you know, test them individually. Another way to manage it, which is my preferred way, is to get a glucometer and learn how to use it. That's what they use to test your blood sugar, a little prick on the finger. There's other ways that you can do that are less painful maybe, but they are much more costly. And glucometers are extremely cheap. You can buy them anywhere. It's usually the test strips that cost the money. But there's several different variations on it. But I highly recommend that you learn how to use it, and then take your first sugar test right when you get up in the morning to see what your fasting blood sugar is. And do that on a regular basis so you can kind of see your norm. And then when you eat a meal, about an hour later, take your glucose test again and see how it's elevated. And you want to have it ideally below 90. There's a lot of controversy about numbers. A lot of them will say 110, 120 is fine. I think that's too high. If your blood sugar is not a problem, then it's not going to go above 100. And in a normal state, we have what's called insulin sensitivity. And the insulin that our body releases is what allows the sugar from the foods, because all foods break down into sugar. It allows it to get into the cell to be used for fuel. And that's why when someone is considered diabetic, their blood sugar is high, because the sugar is all in the blood or in the pee, and that's what's measured high, instead of it getting in the cells where it needs to be. The brain is the biggest hog for sugar, for that particular type of sugar, because it takes the most to, it has the most to process. It develops your ATP, and you've got to have that fuel to think right and for your body functions to work properly. So testing your blood sugar, keeping it, ideally you can do what they call a glucose tolerance test, where they measure it at certain intervals to see how high it goes and then how low it goes after that, and kind of measure that. And that's very helpful. And if you have any food issues or chronic problems, it might be helpful to ask your doctor to do a glucose tolerance test on you. Like I said, you can do it yourself once you get to know a glucometer. And then usually you do a pre-food test, and then you do one right after you eat. And then you do at 15-minute intervals for the first hour, and then 30-minute intervals, and then an hour, and just so on. And you just want to see what that curve looks like. It shouldn't go down really low, shouldn't drop below 70, but you don't want it to go too high. Low blood sugar can be worse than high blood sugar, but you want to see what the patterns and trends are to it. And again, a lot of the allergy symptoms that we have are also early signs of glucose problems. What we have, insulin sensitivity is the normal state where the sugar can get into the cells carried by the insulin. When you get insulin resistance, that's when the cell is not allowing the sugar to get in. And that's when you have all sorts of symptoms that arise. And that's your pre-diabetic stages that, they take a long time to get there, but most people don't even realize they have a problem until they're into full-blown diabetes. So it's a really good idea to pre-monitor that and be proactive with it. So I encourage you to get a glucometer and learn how to use it. Just like I said before about using a remedy kit, just certain things to be proactive and to empower yourself. If you can prevent a lot of problems with the blood sugar issues, because everything else kind of builds on that. If you have adrenal problems or hormone problems, a lot of those are because of blood sugar problems. So if you get your digestive system in order and eat properly, a lot of those problems go away. And staying low glycemic on your food choices. And again, there's lots of resources out there for high and low glycemic foods. All foods break down eventually into sugars. Some are slower than others. And the high glycemic things break down really quickly and flush sugar right into the bloodstream before it can even be managed. So that's a whole nother education. But again, if you have any questions or not quite sure what to do, please contact me and I'll guide you through it. I don't have anything else at this time. I'm going to be out of pocket for the next couple weeks, so I'll resume in July with our talks. And so if you have any questions, feel free to leave something down on the YouTube here, or you can go to Facebook and like and friend me and ask me questions there, and I'll be happy to respond. If I don't know an answer, I'll look it up for you. So again, I'm a medical professional, but I don't do diagnosis and treatment online or in these medias, but I can certainly guide you in a direction you need to go so that you can manage that for yourself. Okay? All right, I'm going to close this for tonight. I hope something I've said has been of value to you, and just know that diet is one of the most confusing things out there, and it's all about making small incremental changes in your daily habits so that your lifestyle reflects, those good habits. Okay? All right, well, you take care, and I'll talk to you in July. Night.